We're talking this morning about our identity as the people of God. We're people who send and are sent. And so far, we've seen, mostly from the Old Testament, that our God is a sending God. We're going to spend the rest of our time this morning looking into the New Testament and thinking about what it means for us to be a sending church. The New Testament tells us about a number of very remarkable sending churches. We start, of course, with the mother church there in Jerusalem. They had heard that powerful Pentecost preaching. They'd experienced deep spiritual fellowship. They had participated in very rich community and had engaged in dynamic economic compassion. No wonder they experienced such remarkable growth and God sending them on out with the gospel. But Jerusalem didn't remain the only center for the spread of the church. Antioch, 300 miles north of Jerusalem, soon became a hub for a mission in the north and in the west. The church there was well placed to be a sending church. It was ethnically mixed. It was well taught by Paul and Barnabas. It was well led by people obviously open to God's Spirit. It was these factors that made Antioch such a wonderful sending church. And then the church in Philippi, it became a foothold for the gospel in Europe. The mission support center there supported Paul's missionary work further south and around the Aegean Sea. These churches and many others mentioned in the New Testament were all sending churches. Let's take a quick look at that passage which Fiona read for us a moment ago. In Romans 10, Paul's been saying how the gospel is for everyone, Jew and non-Jew alike. In verse 13, he's quoted the prophet Joel. Everyone who calls in the name of the Lord will be saved. And then he asks the question that every Christian in all times and all places needs to take to heart. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. The passage here works as a chain of irrefutable logic. Paul's asking how it is that a person can be saved, and he works his way back through the chain. They'll be saved, he says, by being called, by calling on God. But before calling, they'll need to believe, and they can't believe unless they hear. And how will they ever hear unless someone preaches? And preachers need to be sent. The Lord wants our church to send people so that others will be saved. Will we keep doing it? The Lord is sending us so that other people will be saved. Will we continue to go? By the way, I don't know if it's occurred to you yet, at Kirkpatrick Memorial, we're sending all of you, all the time. You know that, don't you? We don't mean necessarily in terms of global travel. That won't be for all of us. But we all have front lines. We all have places that God sends us to witness for him. I've heard of a church who made this explicit in their buildings. Above the exit, where everyone could see it as they leave the building, they have a sign that says, "You are now entering your mission field." What a great idea. That would help us remember that we've been sent to our front lines by the sending God. I've heard of a church that has a notice board. People were sending on mission. Up there are photos of their overseas workers and those who work for mission agencies, but there's also something else. There's a mirror. When members of that church family look at their missionary board, they see themselves. And so they're reminded that as well as being senders of other people, they are really a people who is being sent. Let me close with a story. Church history tells of wonderful sending churches, and we've already thought about those monks heading out from Bangor across Europe in 600 AD. In 1722, Count Nicholas von Zinzendorf welcomed some Christian refugees from Moravia and Bohemia to his estate in Saxony in modern-day Germany. He helped form a Christian community under the name Herrenhut, which means the Lord's Watch. These guys turned the world of their day on its head. In the space of 4 years, in the 1930s, they started missionary enterprises in the Caribbean, Greenland, Lapland, North and South America, and South Africa. A few years later, they'd begun missionary work in Labrador in Canada, among the Australian Aboriginals, and wait for it, on the border of Tibet. All in the 1730s. Isn't that crazy? Again, that begs the question, what was it about this community that made it so committed to proclaiming the gospel of Christ? What made them so ready to be sent? Well, it seems to me that the answer lies with Zinzendorf himself. As a young man of 19, he was sent to visit all the capital cities of Europe in order to complete his education. And one day, he found himself in Dusseldorf's art gallery. He was gazing at Domenico Fetti's Ecce Homo, a painting of Jesus, wearing a crown of thorns. Under the painting, the artist had penned a question as if coming from the crucified Jesus himself. All this I did for thee. What doest thou for me? This image of Jesus, the Lamb of God, suffering in his place, made a huge impact on Zinzendorf. When he founded his movement, he gave them the motto, "Our Lamb has conquered, let us follow him." When he sent out his missionaries around the world, he commissioned them with these words, "Tell them about the Lamb of God until you can tell them no more." Zinzendorf had been gripped by grace. He'd fallen in love with the Lamb. His life gave a beautiful answer to the question Jesus asked him at the tender age of 19. Let me remind you of that question and let me leave it before you. May your life and mine give worthy answer to. All this I did for thee. What doest thou for me? I've chosen a hymn just now focusing on this call to respond to a sending God. It's called Facing a Task Unfinished. It was written in the 1930s by Frank Houghton, the then Bishop of East Sichuan in China. He was also the director of China Inland Mission, the modern-day Overseas Missionary Fellowship. His missional hymn was first sung at mission prayer meetings, but it soon inspired over 200 missionaries to go and to face that task unfinished in China. God used the work of those missionaries, along with others, to grow the Chinese church from 1 million back then in the 1930s to over 100 million today. Keith Getty recently wrote a new chorus for this hymn and relaunched the song a few years ago. It's exciting to think that there are millions of Christians in China who can sing this song today, along with the descendants of those in the West who responded back then to the call of a sending God.